Welcome back to the channel. I'm back today to continue my top 150 NHL prospect rankings, this time with part 2, players number 125 to 101. The first part came out just over a week ago. Took me a little longer than I had hoped for to get this part out with some other work stuff coming up, but now I'm trying to get this one out, and I'm going to try and keep getting these out as quickly as possible over the course of the next few days. So we'll jump right into this part with player number 125, that is Ryan Chesley of the Washington Capitals. He's had a really good NCAA career, recently signed his ELC, and he's headed over to the Hershey Bears for his first season. He ended up playing 4 games at the end of last year and had 3 points in those 4 games. Looks really solid. He's a really solid, steady two-way defenseman who I think projects well as a middle pair guy or could play in the bottom pair role. But he's had some really productive seasons for Minnesota and has been a really key piece to a lot of these junior USA teams. He's played for almost all the USA junior teams throughout his career. He spent 2 years in the U18 teams, wearing an A his second year there, 2 years in the World Junior teams, the U20 teams. Had an assistant, was an A his second year there as well, and was the captain of the University of Minnesota this past year, having 20 points in 40 games. I really just think that he's a really well-rounded defenseman who has a lot of good traits in his game. There's nothing he really does exceptionally well, but there's really not a big glaring weakness in his game. He skates well, moves the puck well, and defends really well as well. And the fact that he's a right shot is just an added bonus that a lot of teams always love to have. You can never have too many right shot defensemen in this league. So yeah, Ryan Chesley lands at number 125. At 124, we have Jack Nesbitt of the Philadelphia Flyers. A shocking pick to me on the day of the draft. Nesbitt had really solidified himself as a top 32 player in the draft class by the consensus. He was going to be a first-round pick. I had him just outside my top 32, but again, I still mocked him in the first round because I figured he'd be a first-round pick. But he went 12th overall, which was a little high for me. I really thought there was a ton of better players on the board for Philadelphia at that spot, and if they really wanted to get a centerman, and they really desperately wanted a centerman, they should have taken one at their higher pick and passed on Porter Martone. As great of a player as he is, there were some great centers on the board there they could have taken to fill that hole down the middle. But they wanted a big physical centerman, and that is what Jack Nesbitt is. Stands at 6'5", he's 185 pounds. He's a really big physical body. He's really tough to move out of the way. But there's other areas of his game that just aren't quite there yet. He was a good point per game in the OHL, a solid season for a draft-eligible player, but just nothing really wows you on the offensive side of things. But there's a ton of physical tools and tons of physical traits. If he puts the rest of his game together, this could end up being a pick that is looked back on as a perfectly fine, good value pick. But I thought he was a guy they could have grabbed at their pick, the pick they traded up at the early 20s there. But regardless of the value of the pick, he is a solid player. He does have some good potential, and he projects well as a middle six. Probably, I expect more of a third line, grind it out, power forward centerman in the future for Jack Nesbitt, unless his offensive game takes a real big jump over the next couple years, which I don't really expect. But the size is there, so if he puts together some more offensive skill, there could be some real good potential there for Philadelphia. At number 123, it's William Moore of the Boston Bruins, a player who I really like, and I was surprised he fell as far as he did, but he doesn't have a very flashy game to him, so it does make sense in a way. Jack Nesbitt doesn't have a flashy game either, but he's 6'5". William Moore he's a bigger forward. He's not a big forward. He's 6'3". He's just a pretty average size for the style of play he has, but he's just a solid low event two-way defenseman who really is just your stereotypical, prototypical third line centerman of the future kind of thing for William Moore. He has some good offensive tools, but he excels as a good face-off man who plays really well in his own end. I think he's got a chance to make a spot on the American World Junior team this coming year. It'll be a tough battle. They have a lot of players that fill a similar role to that. Cole McKinney, who's in the last part, is someone that does that. Camille Bednaric's a guy who I have lower on this list, but he's a year older, so the management may lean his direction. So they do have a lot of guys who could potentially fill that role on that junior team, but he'll definitely be on a team next year. But he's got a chance to break it this year as a bottom six centerman, and that's sort of what his role will be at the NHL level. Good two-way centerman who can play really good defensively and put up some decent offensive numbers as well. I think William Moore was a really good value pick for Boston at the 51st overall. So he should be a talented player, and I'm excited to see what he can do his first NCAA season headed over to Boston College, as most Boston Bruins prospects seem to be. There's a lot of Boston College players over in the Bruins organization, but that is William Moore. At number 122, Yanni Niemann of the Seattle Kraken. He had a really big breakout season this year, really burst out onto the scene offensively in his first full season in North America. He played a couple games in Coachella Valley last year, but not really consistently. Near point per game in the Liga, though, that year, that past season. And then this year, he was really good in the AHL for Coachella Valley. 44 points in 58 games, one of their top scorers on the team. And he had 6 points in 12 NHL games. He had a really good, not a Linsanity run, but had a really good run on the call-up. He was scoring really well early. Slowed down a bit after a while, and then ended up getting sent back down to Coachella Valley once the injuries, stopped piling up for Seattle at the time. But he's got some real offensive skill, and he really showed it off well this past season. Has really proven that he could be a potential middle six winger for the Kraken down the future. Another guy, really big body, 6'4", 220 pounds. So he's just got a really full frame on him, really big, physical, strong presence, and he's got a good scoring touch as we've seen throughout his production at all these high levels in the Liga. It's a really strong men's league. Nearly point per game there, nearly point per game in the AHL his first full season there. Had a really good U20 World Junior Tournament last year. Tons of really good things to build on for Yanni Niemann, who had a really big breakout season and rose big time on my list here. At number 121, it's Emil Hemming of the Dallas Stars. I think he's actually their top prospect at this point, for me at least. I've ranked as their top prospect. A fall from grace, you could say, for the Dallas Stars prospect pool, but it's what happens when you're trying to get over the hump. But Emil Hemming's a decent player. I liked him coming into the draft last year a lot more than I like him now, I would say. He had a bit of an underwhelming draft year +1. Didn't wow me in any ways, didn't really put it all together scoring-wise as I was hoping he would. He didn't really dominate the OHL as I had hoped and expected. He had 48 points in 60 games, which is solid, but as a draft year +1, you're probably hoping for a little bit better production out of him. But he also felt he had 4 points in the 7 games he played at the World Juniors for Finland, but he felt a little bit invisible at times. He didn't really make a big, major impact. He wasn't really driving play, driving offensive pressure, or creating really high-danger chances often. He had a few good moments, but he kind of fell into the background of the game a lot of the times at the juniors, I found, which isn't really ideal for him. We'll see if he can grow a little further and try and round out his game and maybe avoid that sort of thing in the coming years as he develops. But yeah, it wasn't a very promising year, in my opinion, for him, but he is still a really talented prospect who's got a lot of skill, just needs to continue to grow and develop to further that along and further that development even further down the line. At number 120, Marek Vanacker of the Chicago Blackhawks, a player who it's kind of almost the opposite, you could say, of Emil Hemming. I was lower on him when they picked him, but he's had a pretty good couple of seasons, or a pretty good season, one season since his being drafted. He had 42 points in 45 games for Brantford, was a really impressive player in the OHL this year. He did a lot of really good things at the defensive end too. He has some good defensive game, a good defensive mind to him, is a smart player, and he's got it's not a crazy, it's not like he's a lock by any means, but he's got a chance to make the Canadian junior team. He could be in consideration there. I don't think he'll end up making the final cuts. There's a lot of really good players, especially down the middle where he plays, or where he's been playing. I think he could move to the wing at his size, only 6'1", 170. But a talented piece who had a pretty good year and has developed well and continued to grow this past season. Again, didn't quite have a crazy year, but I liked what I saw, the continuation of for him, and he grew decent parts of his game that weren't really potent heading into his draft year. So I think it was a solid year for Marek Vanacker and a good piece for the Chicago Blackhawks to have. At 119, Owen Beck of the Montreal Canadiens. He's been a bit of an interesting player. I really was hoping and expecting him to be more of a regular, maybe pushing for an NHL roster spot at this point, with the way he came out of the OHL, just firing. But he hasn't quite done that yet, and I think that's partly due to the fact the Habs have very quickly overhauled their roster and have really quickly tried to move into a winning position, which means players like Owen Beck might end up falling into the background of the AHL roster, which is unfortunate because he had a really good year this past year in his first AHL season. He had 44 points in 64 games after a really good run with Saginaw to the Memorial Cup last year for them after getting traded away from Peterborough. But I really like Owen Beck's game as a really good two-way centerman that can play almost anywhere in your lineup that you want. He can play on the wing. He's not overly big, but he plays well for his 6-foot frame. He's got a really filled out frame at 198 pounds. And can play physical if you need him to, but has some good skill as well and is able to put the puck in the back of the net. He ended up playing 12 games with the Habs this year, just wasn't able to find that scoring touch in the NHL level, which, isn't uncommon for guys at this stage. It's kind of been what we see for a few of those guys in this area. We'll see if maybe he gets more opportunity, if maybe an injury piles up and he gets a call up to the NHL roster. But there's some good offensive potential here for Owen Beck, but I think at worst, you're looking at a good bottom six, fourth line centerman who can play a good defensive game and do what you need a fourth line centerman to do if that ends up being his role in the future for the Montreal Canadiens. At number 118, Samuel Honzek, a guy who's kind of been slipping down this list and needs a big season to not continue this slide. He was taken pretty high by the Calgary Flames, 16th overall in 2023. And just hasn't really grown his game much. He was taken. The big thing with this pick at the time, one of the biggest things about him as a player was his character, and that hasn't changed. He's still a great character, a great leader on and off the ice. But you were hoping that more of the skill side of his game would come together and really blossom, and it just kind of hasn't. Had a down year after his draft year, where he had 56 points his draft year, only 31 points, 10 less games, but still only 31 points his second season. And has been decent for Slovakia at the juniors tournaments. Nothing out of this world, nothing really all that crazy. And then this past year, he had 21 points in 52 games with Calgary's AHL team. Just not really wowing you, not really doing anything all that spectacular. Ended up playing for the Slovakian World Championship team. Again, didn't really stand out, but was just decent. And I think it's just not really what you were hoping for out of Honzek as a 16th overall pick. You were hoping for him to be a little more than just decent. But there is still potential, there's still plenty of room to grow. He's got the size you're looking for, another big-bodied forward at 6'4". If you can put the offensive skill together, Calgary could have a pretty good player here. It's not been the overly promising developmental path so far. He hasn't really taken a big step forward as you would have hoped. It's just kind of been either plateauing or just kind of falling a little bit or dipping a little bit in production and performance all over. So hopefully he can have a big year this coming season, but as of now, it's just not been a perfect, ideal development for him so far. At number 117, Jesse Kiskinen, a player who really burst onto the scene this past year at the World Juniors, really made his presence felt and really, made people know his name with this past season. He had a really good year in the Liga as well, 44 points in 46 games. And as I mentioned, at the World Juniors, he was an assistant captain for the Finnish team, had 6 goals in 7 games, a really impressive score. He was always around the net, making things happen. When a puck found his stick, the puck would just find his stick. When he was in front of the net, he'd have a stick on the ice, the puck would find it, and he would finish those chances in tight. And he had a really good scoring touch with just shots from a distance, shots from almost all over the ice. Overall, just had a really good offensive performance, was really a scary player to play against because whenever the puck was on his stick, he was a danger to put it into the back of the net from anywhere in any way. So he was a really productive player there. And again, he carried that over into his season with the Liga with 44 points and 46 games for HBK in that league. He's headed over to Grand Rapids to play in the AHL this coming season. I'm hoping for big things out of him. I'm thinking, these players coming out of the Liga with these high production seasons, they all tend to adapt pretty well to the AHL. You look at Yanni Niemann. There was a few players in the last part I mentioned, like Lenny Haaniho, and I compare them all to Ville Koivunen, who was nearly the AHL Rookie of the Year this past season. So these players coming over to the Liga they adapt really well to the AHL game, and I expect no different from Jesse Kiskinen with the way he scores and the way he produces offensively. At number 116, Brennan Othmann, a player who has just yet to been able to break through on this Rangers roster. Now, it's not all on him because the Rangers are notoriously not the best developmental team. They have had a lot of issues in terms of properly developing prospects, and Brennan Othmann's another one of that case. He just hasn't really gotten a ton of great opportunity. He had a decent year at the AHL level, 20 points in 27 games, but at the NHL level this year, he just couldn't put it together. Only 2 points in 22 games, not what you were hoping for. He wasn't a negative on the ice, wasn't a big detractor. He was a +7, so it wasn't like he was just getting outplayed constantly, and there's a reason he got to 22 games. He fit in well. He belonged okay. He just wasn't really standing out. He wasn't really growing as a player and wasn't able to really find any offensive touch over the course of those 22 games. So they sent him back down to the AHL, and he finished the season there. We'll see if maybe this year, maybe there's another more opportunity for him. Maybe he can, make some real good production happen early. Come make the team out of camp and really just carry that momentum through the season. We'll see, but at 22 years old, we're really hoping for Othmann to take that jump and to finally become that full-time NHLer. He's one of those many guys in this 2021 draft class that has been kind of devastated by the circumstances around his development before being drafted through COVID and all that. Guys like Fabian Lysell, guys like Oscar Olausson, Carson Lambos, players like that who are really highly touted and just haven't been able to lock themselves into an NHL roster spot despite the expectations that at this point they would have. So Brendan Othmann's another one of those cases, but there is a lot of potential here for him, and he also plays a decent two-way game, so he could fit in a third-line, fourth-line role if that's where the Rangers think he might just end up being. We'll see how he goes this year. I think there's potential he could make the roster at a camp for New York and see what he can do with it from there. At 115 is another New York Rangers prospect, a new New York Rangers prospect in Scott Morrow, who they acquired as a part of the Keandre Miller trade. Scott Morrow is a very interesting prospect who has just bounced up and down on my radar for a while. Like, there's moments where I'm super high on him and I really think he's got a ton of potential. And there are moments where I'm like, ooh, that just wasn't the right play. That's just not the right spot to be. He looked really promising this season, or heading into this season. I was hoping, when the Gensel trade broke last 2 years ago now, I guess, as a Penguin fan, I was hoping Morrow would be a part of the deal as one of the prospects. He didn't end up being it, and I was disappointed. And he had a pretty good year this year. He was really good in the AHL, 39 points in 52 games for a guy who's not... He had some really good production in the NCAA, but he also plays a good defensive game. That's one of the pieces of his game that stands out to me watching, or was one of the things that stood out to me watching him. But he went over to Carolina, and he was good in the regular season, but in the playoffs, he just had a really rough showing, I found. He was a -5 in 5 games played, didn't register a point, and he looked very out of place, I found. He was getting burnt. He just wasn't... Nothing was really working for him. Nothing was clicking for him. He wasn't making any plays in the offensive end. And the defensive end, he just looked lost at times. He wasn't able to put it all together. And it really was unfortunate. And with the way the Carolina D-core has been developing, with the young pieces they have coming up alongside him, like Alexander Nikishin, who takes big priority as a top prospect in the league, and other young players and other players they have signed, he was kind of on the way out. He was losing his spot to a lot of different guys due to the poor performance in the playoffs and them being more proven pieces. So the move to the Rangers makes sense, and there's an opening on the right side of the New York Rangers roster, so he should have a lot of opportunity there to make himself known and to make an impact and really take that next step and improve his defensive game at the NHL level, because it was a good defensive game at other levels of hockey. The NCAA was good, in the AHL it was good, but in the NHL just really didn't translate. So if he can develop that side of his game a little better, there's a real good player for the Rangers to have on their hands here, and a real good piece of that Keandre Miller return. But I think he should have a good opportunity this coming season to become a full-time NHLer and graduate from prospect status and be a good piece for the Rangers. At number 114, it's Henry Brzustewicz, brother of Hunter Brzustewicz, the Calgary Flames prospect. This is the LA Kings prospect, the younger brother of the two, just recently drafted this year. They do get very confusing, as I confuse them all the time. The Hunter-Henry name is very similar, and they just play such similar styles as well. Henry here, younger, more offensively gifted, and had a better draft year production, like a better, pre-draft production than Hunter did. But Hunter has had really good development since then with Henry. We'll see how it goes beyond his draft year, but he had a really good offensive season in London. 42 points in 67 games, so a plus 24 this season. He was playing a bit of a reduced role due to the talent on this London Knights roster. With the guys like Sam Dickinson and Oliver Bonk. He was a little bit lower on the depth chart, but he should leap into the number one defenseman role, with Sam Dickinson seeming to be headed to the NHL this coming season, and Oliver Bonk headed to the AHL or NHL this season. Cam Allen might also be headed to the AHL this coming season. So a lot of defensemen on this roster on their way out of the London Knights program. There's going to be a big opportunity for Brzustewicz to make a name for himself and really prove that he was worth the 31st overall pick. I mean, he's got the offensive skills. He's got good size. He actually does play a little bit of a better defensive game than his brother. It's still not a wow defensive game. He's an offensive first defenseman, in my opinion, who skates well, moves the puck well, does all the offensive things you want well. But overall, a decent piece. I'm excited to see how he develops. If he takes another big leap like he did heading into this year, like he only had 6 points in 52 games last year in the OHL, 42 points the following year. So he takes another big jump, similar to how his brother did in his draft year +1. This could be a real solid, real good piece for the LA Kings to have moving forward as a part of their young decor. At number 113 is another New York Rangers prospect in Malcolm Spence. They got a lot of guys in this range. They've done a real good job of sort of just getting a decent chunk of quantity into their prospect pool these past couple, really just this past season. Like, a lot of these guys are just players they've acquired this past season. But Malcolm Spence is a good, solid player who slipped a little too far, in my opinion. I wasn't as high on him as some people. He slipped on my rankings over the course of the season. Didn't have a super impressive offensive season, but I thought 43rd overall was really good value for the Rangers. A really great pickup there. But he's a real, big physical energy forward. This guy brings energy to every play. He's always giving you the full effort that you want out of this player. And when he's going, he is just hard to slow down, hard to stop in general. I've had a good year for Erie this past year, but just wasn't really wowing you in the way that he was expected to, because he was projected as maybe a top 10, definitely like a top 15 type prospect in this draft class heading into the year. Didn't really wow you to that level, but so doesn't really have the offensive ceiling you were hoping for, and that's why he ended up slipping. But I think the floor is extremely high for Malcolm Spence as a high motor, high energy forward to play on the third or fourth line and really just give your team a big boost when it needs it most. He's headed to Michigan this coming season, which I think is going to be a really good move for his development. I don't think the OHL had much more to offer him. I think the NCAA will help hone in on other areas of his game and really help him grow even further. I think it's going to be a real smart, good move for his development, and I'm excited to see what they can develop him into. He should be playing alongside a ton of really, really good players. Likely would be the left winger to Michael Hage, who had a really good season last year as well. So those two together will be a dynamic duo to watch. I'm excited for that. But Malcolm Spence has got a lot of promise and a really safe prospect in general. I think the odds of him being an NHL player are very, very high just because of the style of game he brings. It's something teams very much desire to have in their bottom six. At number 112, another player I thought slipped a little too far in the 2025 draft. It's Blake Fiedler for the Seattle Kraken. This was a really great pickup for Seattle. They do a really good job of drafting in the second round. I'm not a fan all the time of how they draft in the first round, but I have no complaints about how they draft in the second round. They've needed defensemen, and I thought they should have taken a defenseman at their top pick, but the fact that they got Blake Fiedler at this pick makes it all worth it, really, getting Jake O'Brien and Blake Fiedler, who I had as a consensus item as a top 32 guy, but a big 6'5" right shot defenseman who grew up around the NHL. His dad played in the league, and he is a motor. He's just a great defensive bulldozer, if you will. He hits hard, he plays physical, and he's a really just steady defenseman. Skates well for his size as well, and can do offensive things. He's not, obviously not an offensive defenseman, but he had 33 points this past year in the WHL, so he can put offensive production on the table if that's what you need. But he's a defense-first guy, and that's what Seattle needs in their prospect pool. That's exactly what they need. It was a really, really great pick, really good value, and I'm a big fan of Fiedler, and I think it's going to be a real good piece. He's got potentially one of the top defensemen in this pool for Seattle, and this is a really good pool, but it's very offense-heavy. But I think Blake Fiedler, I have him as a top defenseman in this pool, and you can make an argument for a few other guys, but I think Fiedler is the guy that really stands out above them due to his size, due to the balance in his game that he has and the defensive game he possesses. So I really like Blake Fiedler. I think this is a really solid pickup for Seattle, and it's going to be a big piece of their prospect pool. At number 111, another 2025 draft pick, it's Milton Gastrin, and it's another 2025 draft pick that slipped too far. A lot of guys slipped out of that first round that I thought were first round locks, seemingly. A lot of big risers at the back end of that first round that really shocked people, like myself. But Gastrin is a great two-way forward who is going to be an ideal third-line center for the Washington Capitals. As you know, they were the President's Trophy winners. They have a top 10, just top 10. I have like probably a top 5, top 7 prospect pool in the league, and they add another great player with great value here at 37th overall. And I think this is a real good piece. Again, your ideal, perfect two-way center, third-line center who plays an excellent defensive game, can put up offensive numbers if you need it to, but he's just smart and really solid in his own end, that's all you really can ask for. I'm excited to see what he can do in a higher level of Swedish hockey. He played at the J20 level this past year, was not well over. He was over a point per game. But this next year, he should be a member of the junior team, and he should be playing the Allsvenskan, which will be higher competition for him. So we'll see if the game translates well to that level, which I expect it will. But it'll be interesting to watch. But I think it's a great piece for Washington to have. At 110, we have Theo Lindstein of the St. Louis Blues. Just a real, solid, reliable defenseman here. Someone who's going to be a decent second pair, likely more of a good third pair guy in the future, but has a high floor, textbook size, skates well, moves the puck well, plays in his own end well, plays in the offensive end well. He's just a well-rounded defenseman. Nothing that really stands out about his game. He doesn't have any wow factor, but low event defenseman who doesn't make a lot of mistakes, doesn't force plays, doesn't do anything out there that's crazy, but just does what needs to be done and does it well, and does it simple, doesn't make a fuss about it. Just you're almost, again, like your ideal player to have on your bottom pair, or to pair with a high event defenseman on your second pair. If you have a really offensive focused guy who makes lapses in the defensive end, Theo Lindstein can be a good guy there to settle it down and to make sure it doesn't get overwhelming for that defensive pair when they're on the ice. Just really good at controlling the game with his skill and making sure nothing crazy happens, no high danger chances against, but he's not going to create tons of offense for you. He can hold his own in the offensive end and do what you need him to do, but he's not going to wow you. That's really what this is with Theo Lindstein, but just an overall solid piece for the St. Louis Blues to have. At 109, another big riser for me this past season is Luca Del Bel Belluz, a player who was highly touted heading into his draft class, slipped down the board, and since has been a pretty steady developer these past couple of seasons. He had 31 points last year in his first full AHL season. This year he had 53 points in 61 games and had 8 points in 15 NHL games. Really great production for Del Bel Belluz, who, 44th overall pick, possesses prototypical size, skates well, shoots hard, passes well, has a lot of the, a well-rounded centerman you could have in your middle six of the future for Columbus. They've got a lot of centermen there, so I'm curious when and where he'll slot in. But there's a chance he could fight for a roster spot right out of camp and make an impact there. Columbus has a lot of young players, so I don't know if he'll actually succeed, but I think there will be a conversation and a competition that he'll be involved in during the end of that that training camp for Columbus, and he could make some noise there and maybe shock some people into making the NHL roster. But if not, he should be another dominant player in the AHL this next season. But I like Luca Del Bel Belluz a lot after the production he put up this past year. At number 108, Luca Cagnoni, almost the complete opposite, you could say, of Theo Lindstein, who was just a few spots behind him. Luca Cagnoni is a very high event defenseman who is very, very high upside, very, very high highs, but, has the low lows as a 5'9 defenseman. He's not prototypical size. He's small, 5'9", 181 pounds though, so he's got some good weight for his height. But this is offensive defenseman. This is offense on all cylinders. 52 points in 64 games as a defenseman in his first AHL season is ridiculously impressive, especially for a player of that size. You get these players of that size, especially on the defensive end, and you assume, okay, well, they can play well, they can produce well and score well in the WHL and the CHL because they're playing against guys who are all the same size and they're older than everyone, yada yada, all that sort of stuff. So it tends to not translate well to the NHL or the AHL or any other professional league for that matter. Luca Cagnoni is an exception. He came over to the AHL and didn't skip a beat. Immediately just started producing really well. Again, the defensive game is lapsing, or it has lapses and has issues and concerns, but that's to be expected out of a player of this size. But if you find the ideal partner next to him to really elevate his game and really elevate each other, Luca Cagnoni can be a really good second pair power play specialist type defenseman for any team. And for the San Jose Sharks, who don't have a ton of elite defensemen in their pool, Cagnoni can make a name for himself. He could be a guy who makes the roster out of camp, similar to Luca Del Bel Belluz. But the offensive production cannot be ignored with Cagnoni. So much offensive skill, so much offense. If he can just be doesn't even be average defensively, because at his size, that's going to be tough to really be able to put up that kind of fight defensively due to it, the physicality of the game. But if he can just be a not disastrous defensive defenseman, there's a lot of potential for Cagnoni to have a long NHL career for a player of his size. At 107, Owen Pickering, another player who's the opposite of Luca Cagnoni, a big-bodied two-way defenseman here, who I thought was really impressive for Pittsburgh in the games he played up this year. I had kind of been lowering my expectations on Pickering since he hadn't made a big NHL splash. He only managed 3 points in 25 games, but he fit in well. And the Pittsburgh D-Corps was not good, but they opted to send him back down to the AHL. Better development, the team was good, they were pushing for a playoff run, and the Penguins didn't have an overabundance of good defensemen. They had an overabundance of defensemen that they kind of just had to play. That was the issue they found themselves in. So there wasn't really a spot for Pickering. I would expect Pickering to make the Penguins roster this next season. If they, I think they should make some more moves potentially. But I think Pickering deserves a spot on that NHL roster. He's not going to put up crazy offensive numbers. He's scored well in WHL, but again, that was the case of the WHL scoring inflation that you would expect. That's what people were accusing or assuming would happen with a guy like Cagnoni. With Pickering, it is what happened because it's not his style. He's a good defensive defenseman, but he played well in the offensive end for the Penguins, moved the puck well from the blue line, walked the line really well, and had some really good moments there. So I really like what I saw from him, and I'm hoping to see more of him in the NHL this coming season. This will likely be his last year on the prospects list because he played the maximum amount of games to be qualified as a Calder candidate, as a Calder eligible player, which is what I use to justify whether a player is a prospect or not. As he played 25 games in the NHL last year, and if you play 26, you're no longer Calder eligible. And I expect Pickering will play at least one NHL game this coming season. But I like what I've seen from him, and he's developed better than I had hoped. I really wasn't high on him coming in, and he didn't really have a crazy breakout after that. But I've watched him in Pittsburgh. I'm liking the potential here of Owen Pickering. At 106, a very similar player in Maverick Lamoureux, a player who is also massive. Pickering's big at 6'5", but Maverick Lamoureux is big. There's a photo going around of him standing next to Olivier Rio, a Florida Gators Canadian basketball player, and it made him look small, but he is not small. He's 6'7". He is big, a big defenseman. It'll be interesting to see what kind of role he can play this coming season. He had a good year. He had dealt with a little bit of injuries at times throughout this season, but played well, 3 points in 15 games at the NHL level, had 13 points in 42 games at the AHL level, but again, another guy, not a scorer, he's a defensive guy first. He showed up some really good, impressive defensive game for Canada 2 years ago with the juniors. With that team, it was a disappointing team. Lamoureux was not one of the disappointing players. He performed pretty well. Despite that team only playing 5 games and getting bounced to the quarterfinals, he was a +6. He had a really good tournament that year. But he's got some really good defensive skills to him, and he uses his size to his advantage really well as a right shot defenseman. But Utah's got a lot of defensemen on that roster. There's so many guys. They just signed Dmitry Simashev, another top prospect, to his ELC coming over for the KHL. And then you've got just Sean Durzi, you got Mikhail Sergachev, you got John Marino, you got Ian Cole, you got they traded away Michael Kesselring, which freed up some space, but there's still just so many defensemen there that are NHL proven and NHL ready, and this team looks like they're ready to push for a wild card spot. So we'll see if Lamoureux can carve out a role for himself, but I think he deserves it. I think he could. I think on a normal, on a lot of teams, he could end up playing as a 6th or 5th defenseman with the skill he has. But Utah's a bit of a logjam. We'll see if he can break through and make an impact this coming season. At 105, Matvei Gridin for the Calgary Flames, and a weird, wild development path for Matvei Gridin. He was a bit of a reach at the spot they took him at the end of the first round, I found. last year, the 2024 draft. But then Gridden just had a wild sort of development path. He was in the USHL his draft year, but then, went over to the QMJHL, wasn't allowed, he just, Muskegon didn't want him back in the USHL, so went over to the QMJHL, arrived a little later, but performed really well there, 79 points in 56 games. Now he's headed to the AHL, it seems, for this coming season for the Calgary Flames. So he was a guy who I was lower on, but he's risen up this list after a really good, productive season in the QMJHL for Shawinigan. 17 points in 16 playoff games as well, which is not to be ignored. But he had a really productive season, was really good offensively, played a decent defensive game. I'm curious to see what he can do at the AHL level, playing that next tier up, as he's gonna tier up almost every year, because I view the CHL as a significantly, not significantly, but a better league for sure than the USHL. So we'll see if he can continue to grow with the leagues he's playing in as he plays in the AHL. It seems that's what he's expected to start the year in for Calgary. We'll see how he progresses there, but a decent offensive skill guy for Calgary to have in their prospect pool. At 104, it's EJ Emery of the New York Rangers. He is your textbook defensive defenseman. He is not going to put up any points. In fact, I don't believe he put up a single point in this past year for North Dakota. He's just going to lock you down. Sorry, I was mistaken. He put up 1 point. He had 1 assist in 31 games for North Dakota, and I think this had a lot of people scared, to be honest. A lot of people have, slipped him down because of that. But this is nothing new. He played the USNDDP in 88 games. He had a total of 24 assists. That was it. He didn't score any goals. This guy is not going to score goals. The U18s, he did put up really good offensive numbers there with 6 assists in 7 games, but he was a plus 15 as well, which also plays with the fact that in 7 games as a plus 15, the US was just blowing people out. But he's just a really good defenseman. He's not going to put the puck in the back of the net. No, he's not going to. But he's not going to let the puck go into your net either. He is just textbook good defensively. Going to be a perfect PK1 monster for the Rangers. Can play bottom pair if that's where you need him, but he will be your top PK guy as a right shot defenseman. He is so good defensively, and that's all you really want out of him. That's what they were expecting when you drafted him. If you drafted Emery and you weren't expecting this, and you're disappointed by the lack of offensive production, you didn't know what you were drafting. You're drafting a defense-first shutdown defenseman, EJ Emery, who I am higher on than most, maybe because I know his offense is going to suck. That's just the way it goes. He's going to be a Chris Tanev type, a Simon Benoit type, a just shut down, not going to score any goals type defenseman. And that's what you need. Players, there's those defensemen are so rare in today's NHL game. Everyone wants to be that scorer. Having an EJ Emery is not a bad thing, in my opinion. At 103, Andrew Basha of the Calgary Flames. A guy who slipped in his draft year all the way to the start, not slipped a ton, but slipped to the second round after he was a very promising prospect heading into the draft year. But as I said, slipped down, had a lot of injury concerns, ended up missing a decent portion of this year for Medicine Hat, but came back and was solid. 29 points in 23 games with Medicine Hat this year as they went to the Memorial Cup. But yeah, he had a lot of injury concerns, or he got injured this year and missed a lot of time, which was unfortunate for his development after a really good 85-point campaign the year prior. Now he's headed to the AHL. We'll see what he can do for Calgary there. I'm hoping that if he can stay healthy, he should continue on a great developmental path. He looks really promising. Just got to stay on the ice this coming season, and then should be no concerns for him at all, really, for him this coming season, if that's what he can do for Calgary. But I think there's a lot of potential here as a good scoring middle six winger for the Flames. At 102, Denver Barkey of the Philadelphia Flyers. A very interesting prospect. The size is going to be a concern, especially considering the way he plays in the OHL. He plays a very hard-nosed style of hockey. Gets in your face, gets in the corners, but he's 5'9", 154 pounds, so he is very small as well. But despite playing a very, hard-nosed, gritty, he's not going to be super physical, but it's just the style, the energy he plays with. He's just in your face all the time. He has a lot of skill, though. He does a ton of skill. At 82 points in 50 games for London this year, 20 points in 10 playoff games, 102 points the year prior. this guy's got a lot of skill, a lot of scoring touch. This is going to be a big season for him to see if he can continue that in Lehigh Valley for the Phantoms, for the Philadelphia Flyers AHL squad. He's going to be very similarly looked at as like a Luca Cagnoni. Is he a product of the league he was playing in being a little worse, or does he just have enough skill to get by anywhere? If he can put up really good numbers in the AHL, I'll have full faith in Barkey becoming a offensive producer at the NHL level. But this is going to be a big season for him to prove that he belongs in this league and can play alongside players who are just bigger and stronger than he is, because he's a very small forward. I'd love to see him put some more weight on it. He's only 154 pounds. I'd love to see him put a little more weight on the frame to really help minimize the physical disadvantage he's at. But the skill is there. If he can survive really on the ice at the NHL level, he should be a really skilled forward. And then finally at 101, it's Adam Jiricek, a player who has been slipping and might slip even further with the way he's been developing. It hasn't been as good as you would hoped. He's got some good stuff to his game, but the injury the injury into his draft year really just kind of derailed things in not in a good way. Obviously not in a good way. Tearing his Achilles at the juniors tournament was just such a brutal break for him. It took him out the entirety of the next season, and he missed parts of this season as well. Was a late start this season. Was good for the Czechia junior team. Wasn't wowing me really. He put up good points, but he didn't really stand out. Another case of that. The production was there, but they felt almost a little empty because I wasn't noticing him stand out above the rest. He was good, but again, there was a lot of players on that team that outperformed him. So the tough thing with Jiricek is a lot of his skills in the offensive end and with the way he skates with the puck and moves the puck moves the puck along with how he skates. But with the Achilles tear, that could be something that ends up, lingering, and it might end up declining his production in that area. So it'll be interesting to watch as he plays hopefully a full season this coming year to see if he can, get back to the point he was at before he was injured, and that the prospect he was looked at as a top 15 type of guy. Ended up still going 16th overall, so he still went really high, but he didn't have that kind of season you were expecting this past year for Brantford. So if he can play like we expected him to his draft year and develop like that, he could rise back up on this list, but it's not been a super promising look post-injury for Adam Jiricek so far. But I think there's still potential there, and I still like him as a prospect. I still have him at number 101. That'll do it for this part here, for part 2. The next part will be coming out in the next couple of days. We'll be jumping into the top 100, getting into the real great prospects of the NHL here. That'll do it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe to see the future parts, and go check out all the past videos. You can even go check out last year's series as well. But thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.